I'm Bob Short, and this is Reflections on Georgia Politics, sponsored by Young Harris College and the Richard B. Russell Library at the University of Georgia. Our guest is Tom Buck, longtime Columbus lawyer and civic leader who served 38 years in the Georgia General Assembly. Welcome, Tom.
Thank you, Bob. It's a pleasure to be with you.
With your permission, we'd like to divide our conversation into three parts. First, your early life in Columbus, then your service in the Georgia General Assembly, and finally, life after politics. Okay. But you were born right here in Columbus, I believe, in this very place we're sitting.
Well, I was born on March the 2nd, 1938, and my mother and father lived in this house. And we continued. I grew up in this area. I went to grammar school about 3 blocks up the road. I graduated from, got through grammar school, went to Columbus High School, which is about 3 or 4 blocks from where we are. Graduated from high school in 1955. Went to Emory University, got a degree, majored in political science. I stayed on at Emory for another 3 years and got my law degree. And fortunately, when I got out of law school, I had passed the bar. And so I come back to Columbus to pursue my dreams of practicing law, and was very fortunate to get involved with a fine law firm. And we had an excellent law practice, and was well known throughout not just Columbus, but throughout the state of Georgia. And I started practicing law with them, and like I said, in '62. '63 comes around, and I have to go off to the military. So I go, they make me, instead of being a JAG officer, I turned out being a combat medic, and wound up at Fort Sam Houston, Texas. But I was in the reserves, and I had to continue to go to reserve meetings, you know, in the summer, usually for 2 weeks, and then 1 week in a month. And finally, in 1966 was when I had the opportunity to get elected to the Georgia House. Right. But living in this area was quite an experience. I had a paper route that started up at the Winter Grammar School and went all the way down past the Bradley Museum. And also there was a grocery store up here about 2 blocks, and I sacked groceries on the weekends. And my father had instilled in me a strong work ethic. And he had a lot to do with my future and life and what I was doing. And I was fortunate enough to be able to go to law school and get my own profession and not be involved with family and some family businesses, because sometimes those are not very much fun. But the time of growing up in this area is fantastic. Now, when I moved here, my father still owned this place, and it had been used as an insurance agent office. One time somebody lived here, and then later on it became a decorator's office. And I moved out here probably about 10 years ago or 15 years ago, and set up my own law practice here by myself. But it was the same house. I was born at the city hospital, but I was brought to this house to grow up.
When did you first get interested in politics?
Well, I guess you would say, I don't know how to really say this. At Emory University, I ran for and got elected president of my freshman class. That was my first brush with politics as such. And you know, I had some friends that were lawyers that here in Columbus that had served or were serving, and hear these stories about, you know, the General Assembly and a little bit about the House and a little bit about the Senate. And at that time in my life, I was single, and this was like in 1966. And a bunch of the younger lawyers used to get together downtown to the favorite pub and drink a few beers after lunch, and after work, and you know, get on with our business. Well, a friend of mine, a good friend of mine, a colleague of mine was Milton Jones, who was serving in the House And I had grown up with Milton. I think he was a year or two ahead of me in grammar school and high school. His wife and I were in the same class in high school. Anyway, Milton comes in to hear the guys sitting around and says, we got to find a candidate to run for the Georgia House. Representative Jack Brinkley is going to run for Congress. It's going to create an open seat. And we need to have some of our people in that seat. I need somebody to come up there and help me. And so we go around the room, and everybody in the room, there must have been a dozen of us, said, no, I can't do it. I've got 2 young children at home, or I can't afford it, or my job won't let me do this. And so it gets to me, and he says, Buck, what about you? And I said, I don't know. I'd have to get permission from my bosses, because I was not a partner, I was just a junior in the law firm. And so I went back to the office and I talked to Mr. Howard Hollis, who had served in the state Senate, and told him what I'd like to do and what was going on politically in Columbus about Brinkley deciding to run for the United States House of Representatives. And so Mr. Hollis talked to the other partners in the firm, and we had a sizable firm. At the time, there were about 12 or 13 of us in that law firm. And the next morning, Mr. Hollis called me back and said, I'm going to give you the green light. I've talked to all the partners, and they think it'll be good for you and it'll be good for our law practice. So the next morning, or that same morning after I got the green light, we had a press conference that afternoon, and this was in 1966, and we announced what we were going to do and qualified at the proper time and got elected. Did have opposition in that first term, but I got elected and went and was sworn in officially in January of 1967.
Do you remember your first campaign?
Yeah, at that time, people didn't spend the money or as much money to run a campaign on as far as advertising and whatnot as they do today. In today's world, it's just gotten where it's out of whack, in my personal opinion. But we had at-large seats. At that time, we had 7 House members from Columbus and 2 state senators. And my district that that ran for and got elected was an at-large, so I had the whole county of Muskogee as constituency. And then later we get to reapportionment and whatnot. We went to single-member districts, but I went in as I said, had the whole county. So my experience in the campaign was I had a pretty good family name. Our Buck family's always been very involved in civic affairs and supportive of things that have led to the betterment of this area. And I felt like it was something I could do to give back to the community, because they would have been good to me, my father, and my grandfather. And so I took it from there, and ultimately, during the election, when I found out I had opposition, the fellow running against me had qualified by petition. And I worked the whole county. I went everywhere. I went to residences and knocking on doors and subdivisions during the week, and on the weekends I might, go knock on doors and try to build up some sense of where people knew who I was and knew the name, knew the background, and had confidence enough to elect me in that particular race. And in that year, the Democratic Party in Georgia was a very, very conservative bunch, and very few Republican members in the House and the Senate. And I got qualified, got elected, and stayed there 38 years. And my political philosophy always stayed the same from the day I started to the day I quit. I would be probably classified now as more of a Republican than a Democrat. But we ran and had a very successful race. But the personal contacts had very little advertising. I had some signboards around town. Had a few bumper stickers, and maybe had an ad or 2 on the radio, and maybe an ad or 2 on the TV. But it made me a better person to run for an at-large seat, because I got to know more people in this community. and fortunately, and met a lot of good people in this community, and they were very supportive, and were supportive all the time I stayed up there.
So in 1967, you went to Atlanta to begin what turned out to be 38 years in the General Assembly. What was it like to be a freshman legislator?
Well, I'll tell you this story. One of my partners in law practice told me after I'd gotten elected, he said, "Son, when you go up there now," he said, "keep your mouth shut, listen, and make as many friends as you can." And I subscribed to that theory, and it paid dividends over the years. And I even moved into, I think I mentioned before, that in treating people, regardless of race, color, or creed, I had this philosophy, and I think it comes from my background and growing up, but I treated people like I wanted people to treat me, regardless of sex or political party or affiliation, and made many, many friends over a period of time I was there. And was very fortunate to kind of move up the ladder in a short period of time. I had a wonderful relationship with the late George L. Smith, who was Speaker when I went there, and at that time was a very historical time in the state of Georgia politically. We had to, General Assembly had to elect a governor. We had a joint, the way the morning started, we were all sworn in, and then we had to elect a speaker and a speaker pro tem and whatnot, clerk. And this was when George L. and got a group together, and we decided to divorce the House and the Senate from the direct control of the governor's office, which we did, and which was, I thought, was a great thing for the people, really, because you had such a handful of people running state government before we divorced ourselves from the governor's office that it just kind of left a bad taste in your mouth. Well, anyway, we had, on that first day, it was the second Monday in January, after we took the oath of office, and after we elected the speakers and speaker pro tems and whatnot, then we had a joint session with the Senate and a roll call vote on who you wanted to vote for governor. At that time, Lester Maddox and Howard Bo Callaway were the two candidates. Muskogee County had gone real strong for Bo Callaway. He was Republican, but Bo had been our congressman here in the 3rd District and was well known in this community and surrounding counties. And so when the time came for the roll call, I didn't have any choice other than to vote for, I thought at that time, Bo Callaway. And out of the delegation we had of 7 House members and 2 senators here in Muskogee, we had 1 member that voted for Mr. Maddox, and the rest of us voted for Bo Callaway. I would say George Busby voted for Bo Callaway, former Governor Busby. And that was a historical, very historical part of our history. And it was a new tone and a new day, the way the General Assembly operated and worked. And my first few years, I was just pretty much trying to learn what to do and how to do and who to do. And it paid dividends. I established an excellent relationship with Speaker George L. Smith, who was Speaker for several years until his death, untimely death, I might say. And he kind of boosted my career up to the point where when he left us, I had been placed, I had a chairmanship of a standing House committee. I was on the Appropriations Committee, I was on the Rules Committee, and also a committee we used to call the Green Door Committee, and which was a small group of inner sanctum that made a lot of policy. And so I have to thank, with deep affection, my relationship with the then Speaker. And of course, when he died, we had to elect a new Speaker, which at that time we all flew down to Swainsboro. I say we all did. Most of the members of the General Assembly either drove or flew. I was fortunate, I got to fly. And it was a big, big funeral, and I'd been to Swainsboro before to play in a golf tournament down there, and had gotten to know George L. pretty well. But when he died, then the race was between Tom Murphy and and George Busby. And so we get home from Swainsboro, and I get a call from Sloppy Floyd, who was a chairman of the Appropriations Committee in the House, and he came from Tryon, Georgia, up in North Georgia. But he was a great friend of the speakers and others there that were in leadership positions. And I get this phone call from Sloppy Floyd, and he said, "Boys, a deal's been struck." Said George Busby's going to run for governor, and Tom Murphy's going to support him in that endeavor, and Tom Murphy's going to run for speaker, and George Busby's going to support him in that race. And so that's how we got home, and we get this phone call. Well, I had known Mr. Murphy. I, never had really much dealings with him at the time. At that time, he was Speaker Pro Tem. And my friends and I get on the phone, and we call Mr. Murphy and to congratulate him and tell him we were all for him, and tried to get in on the ground floor. And my relationship with Tom Murphy was excellent. He helped me in my whole career until he retired, and for some reason had some confidence in me and put me in important places that George L. had. But living there without George L. and now having Tom Murphy, I eventually served as chairman of the Committee on Higher Education, which we called at that time the University System Committee. I served as chairman of the House Retirement Committee. Then I served as chairman of the House Ways and Means Committee for many, many years. And then finally, I served my last term as chairman of the House Appropriations Committee. So I had a pretty full schedule. And never dreamed I would stay there that long. Thought maybe a couple of terms that'd be all I'd be interested in. And I wasn't married though, so I could do pretty much be away from home without disturbing the sanctity of a household. But later on in life, I did get married, and I don't mind telling you, it sometimes, I knew it was time to come home, because I was spending so much time in Atlanta away from Susan and my family here in Columbus. Even though the legislature only meets 40 days, we used to say 40 days and 80 nights, but 40 days would sometime extend into 60 days, depending on recesses and whatnot. But I had a full career, and I made a lot of good friends.
Let's back up a minute, if you will, to 1966 and the race for governor, in which you had some pretty heavy candidates in the Democratic primary, which was finally won by Lester Maddox. And then you had the race between Maddox and a Republican, Bo Callaway. Did you have a favorite in that race?
Well, I guess I had a favorite, and it was Bo Callaway, because I knew Mr. Callaway and knew what he had done in the past and knew his family history, and he had been a congressman in this area, and so I had gotten to know him through that relationship. And so I guess, yes, I did, but I was still, I don't think I was being disloyal. Somebody would say I was being disloyal to vote for the Republican and not the Democrat. I guess it got down to personalities, and I was more impressed with Mr. Callaway and what he could do than I was Mr. Maddox. I always got along with Mr. Maddox. He was quite a character, and he always called me Iceman. He couldn't remember Tom Buck, but family owned Buck Ice and Coal Company. He could remember that. So see Governor Maddox, even after he went over and was lieutenant governor, and I'd see him around, he'd say, "How you doing, Iceman?" I'd say, "Fine, Governor, good to see you." So I got along and respected, and I think Lester Maddox did an outstanding job as governor, a lot better than a lot of people thought he was going to do. He made some excellent appointments to some positions that opened the doors for people that you wouldn't think Maddox would do from what you read in the newspaper. But he performed pretty well.
Before we get too far down the line, I want to ask you about your relationship with Speaker Murphy.
Well, Speaker Murphy, when he took over as Speaker, the Speaker usually has the authority to name committee chairs and whatnot. So I was, of course, interested in hoping he was not going to do away with my job. And he called me one day and said, "Buck," said, "I want you to take over the House Committee on Higher Education, University System." He said, We've had Chapel Matthews here for a long time. Chapel's left us, gone. And I want somebody that can run the committee, but also is not committed to the University of Georgia and Georgia Tech. I want somebody that's independent from those institutions and said, you got your law degree in education, formal education at Emory University. So I feel like that you could do a job well done and still make sure that everybody was treated fairly. And I really enjoyed that chairmanship. You get to meet a lot of good people. We were dealing with presidents of universities and colleges in Georgia. The Board of Regents, which is made up of some outstanding people. And over the years, I got real involved in it, and then we put a new system in as far as financing higher education. And George Busby was governor, and he put me on that commission. And we came back with a plan on how we were going to allocate funds for different categories and different institutions. And, you know, I was happy as a pig in slop with that. I got to go to all the football games and sit in the president's box and, you know, and establish a good relationship with a lot of people that worked with the university system and at Georgia Tech as well as the University of Georgia. Murphy, that was a step up as far as I was concerned. It had a little more prestige than being chairman of the retirement committee. And then one day I get this phone call, and it's Tom Murphy, and he calls me Bucko. How you doing? And I wasn't doing too well. I was sick. I think I had the flu. And he said, the reason I'm calling is I want you to take over the chairmanship of the House Ways and Means Committee. And said, I know you and I know how mean you can be, and said you can be the one that doesn't have a problem saying no to somebody. And that's what I need. And said Bill Dovo was the chairman at that time, and he has resigned to take a job with the Public Service Commission. And I said, well, Mr. Murphy, I said, I appreciate this. It's quite flattered, but I said, can I let you know tomorrow? Can I sleep on it? And I said, you know, I never served on Ways and Means. And he said, well, all right, said, sleep on it, let me know something first thing in the morning, because I've got to make a decision. And don't tell anybody that I've called you about this. And I said, no, sir. So I got home that afternoon late, got to thinking, well, Murphy had done a lot for me, and if he's asking me to do something for him, I've got to do it. So I called him at home in Bremen, got him on the phone, told him I thought it out and would be happy to take over that chairmanship, and which he said, well, I appreciate it, and said, I've got to make some other changes, and I'll let you know when you can say something about this to the public. So about 2 days went by, and he made the announcement. He moved Calvin Smyrie, who's from Columbus, in as chair of higher education, and then he took somebody, I can't remember, somebody else, and filled in. Calvin had a chairmanship of, I think, industrial relations at that time. He moved out of that, took over higher education, and Speaker Murphy put somebody else in for that committee at that time. And it's quite an experience chairing that committee.
Tell us about the committee and what you do, what the committee did.
You know, under the Constitution of the state of Georgia, and all of your bills that are introduced that affect revenue and taxes are assigned to the Ways and Means Committee. And so you get a lot of visitors and lobbyists coming in to see you about certain pieces of legislation, and members. And what I did as chairman, we had I had a good staff that had worked in that committee, particularly a lady named Monty Sellers. She had been working in that as not just secretary, but you know, maybe a little more of a higher up job than that. But she probably knew more tax law related to Georgia than anybody else in the Capitol would. And so I had her to help me and show me around a little bit till I got where I was comfortable enough and felt like I could run the committee the way I wanted to run it. And didn't make a whole lot of changes, but we set up a subcommittee system where any legislation that was introduced that was referred to Ways and Means, I would set up 3 or 4 different subcommittees, and I'd assign the legislation to those committees, let them have full hearings, public hearings on the issues, especially those that were complicated or controversial. Some of the legislation was easy, you know. But we were very careful. We worked closely with the Revenue Department as to revenues and how they were coming in, from which source and whatnot. And it was an education in itself to see how state government was being funded and how it was being paid for. It was hard work, and I guess I was able to do that without causing any problems. And I thank Tom Murphy for giving me the opportunity to do that. But I think on top of that, the highest honor I ever received as far as being involved was being named as chairman of the Appropriations Committee, which was a real interesting and it's a full-time job, and but I enjoyed it.
Let's talk about that. The appropriation process in Georgia actually begins in the governor's office. Is that not right?
That's correct.
With the budget estimate.
That's right.
Revenue estimate.
Right.
How does it go from there?
Well, the governor's got floor leaders and whatnot in the House and in the Senate. And all revenue bills have to go through the Ways and Means Committee as far as any tax is concerned. But on appropriations, the governor would introduce a bill. We normally had two bills on appropriations. We had supplemental appropriations bill, which the fiscal year starts on July the 1st and expires on June the 30th. Well, sometimes we had some things we want to change, and so we'd have a supplemental budget bill that we would address first. And that would go through the process of passing the House Appropriations Committee, going to the Senate for them to do whatever they want to it, getting back into what we call a conference committee, where there are 3 House members, 3 Senate members that deal with the differences between the two bodies as to what the final version of the budget's going to be. And then we pass that, and the next we take up it's the same process. We take up the next fiscal year's budget, the big budget as we call it. And this was real interesting. We'd have the governor come in and make a speech as to what he wanted and why he had proposed what he had and whatnot. We'd have department heads from every branch of state government come into joint meetings with the Senate Appropriations Committee to talk about finances, taxes, appropriations, allocations, whatever. And then ultimately it would be the 3 House members and the 3 Senate members would agree on what we call a conference committee report. And then that report went to every senator and every House member, and we take a vote up or down on whether or not to accept the conference committee report, and let it become law, or whether we had to go back and negotiate some more. It took a lot of time, but it was also interesting too. You could see, department heads come in that you never would see except maybe once a year, and it was important in representing your constituency to be able, on a constituent's call on a problem they've got with the state, for me to know somebody I could call in some department or some department head and say, hey, this is Tom Buck, I got a constituent's got a problem, and I want to see if you can give me some guidance or some help. And most of the time, the department heads were easy to get along with, or could explain certain things that we as legislators didn't really know. But it was a full-time job. I mean, the legislature's set to go for 40 days. They always recess. This year they've recessed 2 or 3 times because they're having a problem reaching agreement on the budget. And with the present economic status that we are in right now, I can understand, and it's going to be tough on those guys to have to vote to hopefully not raise any new taxes, but to cut areas that need to be cut for the time being and still maintain state government at a good level, and including education. And
you mentioned the Green Door Committee. Define that for us.
Well, the Green Door Committee was not a real committee, but the Green Door Committee was kind of what I'd like to look at, and I say with affection, the good old boys that were on the Green Door Committee would really make a lot of the decisions that would go directly to the Speaker's office and also to the Rules Committee as far as what we wanted to do on this matter or that matter. It wasn't just confined to appropriations and tax laws. And there were probably about 10 to 12 of us on that, and we would meet behind the Green Door. As the media called it the Green Door, but it was really behind Tom Murphy's office in a conference room where we'd sit around the table and I think he liked to call it the policy committee more than it was. It really wasn't a committee, but your leaders, like your chairman of Ways and Means, Appropriations, University System, whatnot, get together at the beck and call of the boss, who was Tom Murphy, and we'd sit there and go over certain things that we liked about what was going on here or what we better not do over there. And you could get a lot done with a smaller group. Right. And even though it probably was not wide open, you know, nobody could just walk in the Greenville room without permission. So.
Right. You mentioned conference committees on the appropriations bills. You've served there. Tell us what happens in those negotiations.
Well, what you find yourself in is the House has passed a bill on the budget. The Senate has passed a bill on the budget, which has its differences from the House's position on certain matters. And it winds up where the Senate disagrees with the House bill and the House committee disagrees with the Senate bill, so it goes into what's called a conference committee. And that means, under the rules of the House, procedure and whatnot, that the Lieutenant Governor appoints 3 senators, usually the chairman of the committee and 2 others, to the conference committee, and the Speaker appoints 3, and he would appoint the chairman of the Appropriations Committee, and also Terry Coleman, who was a longtime member of the House, and Larry Walker. And I served on conference committees for, I guess, 28 years. I was on the Budget Conference Committee, which was quite interesting. It was a very powerful position to be in. You could do some things for some folks that normally nobody else could do, and I meant like getting some funds for a certain project in Columbus, Georgia, for instance, or getting money for
earmarks.
Yeah, earmarks, and which I don't know whether that's a good idea now or not, but it was an honor to serve on that and be involved in it, and the whole time I was there was Terry Coleman was on the conference committee, and Larry Walker, and me, and the way I was put on was because Bubba McDonald, who had been chairman of the House Appropriations Committee, decided he wanted to run for governor, and so there was a vacancy there as far as that position was concerned. So Tom Murphy appointed me to take Bubba's place on the conference committees, and you know, you had your supplemental conference committee and your regular budget conference committee. So, and it also taught you a lot about where money's going and who's spending money and what they're spending it for, whether it be DOT or, you know, certain money is already dedicated to DOT, Department of Transportation, the Revenue Department here, corrections over here, just a university system, who's getting what, even though the university system under the Board of Regents has got final say-so over what how they gonna spend the money that's appropriated to them. But it was kind of a high-profile position.
How long does it take to negotiate a final budget?
Well, when you've got when your financial situation is in good shape, meaning the economy, like it was up until about 3 years ago, and started going downhill, it's pretty easy because you had excess funding and no problems. And we would try to be responsible, but also accommodate things that we felt like needed to be funded, or more funded, or whatnot. Now, on the other end of the coin, when you find yourself in a position like we're in now, the budget cuts are going to affect higher education, they're going to affect public education, school teachers, state employees, public safety, you name it, even DOT. One thing that concerns me a lot, I've always been pro-law enforcement or pro-public safety. My whole legislative career, I believe strongly in maintaining the Department of Public Safety at its highest level. Now they're in the process of having to take cuts and cut back on what they're doing, which affects the safety of the public down the road. And I know they're trying to do the best they can with what they got, but you know, some things I think are more important than other things are. What I think is important may be you don't think so. You might think something else, but that's human. There's nothing wrong with that. But I'm just hopeful that personally that in the next couple of years that things are going to get back to where they used to be, and then if they do, then we can come back, or they can come back and address some of these cut problems that they're going through now. So it's not fun time to be in the Georgia General Assembly under these circumstances where you got to say no to a lot of people, and a lot of these people saying no to are your friends, and you just can't do it. And hopefully the general public and the voters understand, that if you don't have it, you can't pay for it, because we have to live under what we call a balanced budget. We can't go in debt, or we sell bonds or something like that. But it's real tight right now.
Everybody's talking taxes. Does Georgia's tax system need overhauling?
Well, I'm sure that we've probably could create a special committee to study it and come back with some recommendations. I'm sure there's some things that have been on the books for a long time that probably need to be re-examined or examined to see if they're fulfilling the purposes of why it was put on, or what it's generating, or what it would do if you eliminated that program and put another program over here. So your tax situation is not a lot of people understand that, and no reflection on anybody's integrity or intelligence. But you take an average legislator, unless he spent some time, he or she do not know that much about the tax structure in the state of Georgia or the budget process. So it's probably something that they ought to take a look at. And I've seen in the news media this last several months since the General Assembly's in session that things have been proposed, and some tax increases in this area and some decreases over here, whatnot. But it's a bad time for. It's not the best time in the world for the state of Georgia as far as the financial situation is concerned.
I don't think people understand that when the budget goes up, the revenues must increase, or you've got to cut the budget.
That's right.
One of the two. And it's a difficult. You can't give tax breaks in periods where that's the case, like it is today. I guess one response might be a more efficient government, but that too is a can of worms.
Well, in the past, I think Governor Perdue created some type of commission to go in and look at the tax structure in Georgia and come back and recommend to his office what changes they think could be done or should be done. They would change a few things, and trying to eliminate waste in government, so to speak. Paying for things we really don't need to be paying for, doing things we don't really need to be doing. That's something that, it sounds good. Let's take a look at it and see if we can. But it's something that really ought to be looked at, at least every 5 years or so, or maybe every 10 years. But in good times, you don't think too much about that. And only when we go through hard times like we are now is when you.
Well, I don't think you think either, Tom, about what the loss of jobs and that part of the economy, what effect that has on us, because 45% of our annual revenue is from income taxes.
Right.
And the other, I think that's about 35% is from sales tax.
Sales tax. Then
Well, if you aren't making money and you aren't spending money, then that certainly is going to affect your revenue stream.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Good. I think that history would require me to ask you about the great feud between our friend Speaker Murphy and our friend Lieutenant Governor Miller.
Well, it's interesting you would bring that up. It was one of those days the legislature was in session. The House side had finished its business for the day. The Senate was still in session. And the good old boys were back behind the green door, and Speaker Murphy had summoned us to talk about the supplemental budget and the conference committee report, reminding that the conference committee was made up of 3 senators and 3 House members. and they had a position on certain items in the budget, and we had. And we were trying to resolve these differences, and it's kind of like a dog and pony show. You go in, you meet, public meeting, whatnot, you go through things, and eventually you get down to the not much left to do, to put it to bed and adopt it. And on this particular occasion, Tom Murphy and myself and Larry Walker, Terry Coleman, and I think maybe Bill Lee were sitting back in the conference room, in Speaker Murphy's conference room, and he brings up and said, well, boys, tell us what's going on with the budget, what's going on with the conference committee. And Terry was chairman of the Appropriations Committee, so he was a spokesman, and he said, well, Mr. Speaker, said, we've got several items that we want that they won't let us have, and we've got several items that they want, we won't let them have, but if we can agree on some certain things, we'll give some, and they'll give some, we can wrap this thing up. And he said, well, I tell you what, fellas, said, let's go over and see the Lieutenant Governor and see if we can talk to him about this thing. And so bear in mind that Speaker Murphy was not particularly fond of Lieutenant Governor Pierre Howard, and Pierre Howard was not particularly fond of Speaker Tom Murphy. So we go over there, and the Senate's still in session. We go in a side door, side room, and we walk down front and stand by the podium, and the Lieutenant Governor's presiding, and he lets us sit there, and more, I think, because of Murphy than anything else, and lets him cool his heels for about 15 minutes before he comes over to the end of the podium and says, yes, sir, Mr. Speaker, what can I do for you? And so Murphy says, well, Governor, said, we're trying to get this thing resolved. We've gotten this far, we got very little left to do, but your people want this and our people want that. And we're at a stalemate, and if we can give you some things, you can give us some things, and we can put this thing to bed. And Lieutenant Governor Howard looked at Murphy and said, well, I'm sorry, Mr. Speaker, I can't do that. And with that, Murphy said, well, I tell you what, Governor, I said, you can just KMA. Come on, boys, let's go. And we were like little ducks walking out of the Senate chamber back over to Murphy's office. But anyway, it got resolved in the next couple of days, and we went on to something else. But that was a funny thing to me that happened.
You know Tom Murphy is probably as well as anybody. Did you find him as tough and insensitive as the media tried to make him out to be?
No. You know, the media tried to make him look like a redneck lawyer from the country. And the redneck lawyer from the country was plenty smart. I think Tom Murphy did more for the state of Georgia than anybody I know of in his time that he was there. And he was hard-nosed, but he also had a strong religious background where he was good to people and wanted to help people less fortunate. And you could see this good side of Tom Murphy. I could, because I was around him a lot, that the media wouldn't pay any attention to. And there are a lot of things that he did for this state that would not be here today if it hadn't been for Tom Murphy. Like the Georgia Dome and several facilities, Turner Field, some of these other big things. It didn't do anything to help him in his legislative district, but it helped the state of Georgia. And he had this ability to work well with people as far as race or gender. And if you noticed when he was speaker, he had pretty much stacked deck as far as having certain people from urban areas involved in the committee process in a high position, certain people from the rural areas, certain situations with the black community and the white community, and the rich and the poor. So he was really, in my opinion, was unduly crucified by the media, but we got to accept it, and he got to accept it, and just didn't worry about it, because he was fair and square, to everybody. I mean, even the opposition party, he was, in my opinion, was always fair to them. Mm-hmm. And he could be a very gentle person.
Were you surprised when he was defeated in 2002 after 28 years as Speaker?
I was kind of surprised, but when you look at the census and you see where the districts are redrawn, which we are obligated to do by law every 10 years, that Murphy's district didn't look like it was the district he was going to have a hard time getting reelected. And he could have put a stop to that if he wanted to. He could have put anything in that bill, that reapportionment bill, that related to his seat that would make him be favorable rather than not favorable, because he was the boss. He was the boss man, and he's going to say, all right, I want this, this, and this, and y'all argue over the rest of it. And you say, yes, sir, Mr. Speaker, that's fine with us. Of course, we're all kind of looking after each other's, as to where the incumbent is and where he's going to be under this new plan. But it wasn't a real shock to me, no, that he got defeated. I had an occasion to visit with him on several times after he was defeated, and he came to the Capitol every now and then, and we'd see him and visit with him. And of course, when he expired, we were all involved. I say we were all, some of us were involved in being a part of the I want to say the funeral. It wasn't necessarily the funeral, but it was a day of honoring Tom Murphy in the House. Mm-hmm. And we had several people there that made speeches about him, and it was a sad day to see Murphy go. And he died, and I think had he been still running the show, so to speak, he'd still be with us today. But he wouldn't want to not be here and be involved, and so maybe he's happy that he's gone to glory. Had an occasion last week, a couple of weeks ago, they had a portrait unveiling of Tom Murphy in the Georgia House, and they invited some of us older fellows that had been there in his group to come up and sit, and it was nice seeing some Speaker Murphy's relatives, his granddaughters and grandson, his son, and his daughters, sons, and grandchildren, and it made you just think about the old man. You could just look at him and start thinking about different things that he had been involved in as far as I was concerned, or something he had helped me with a project for Columbus or whatnot.
What do you remember most about him?
Well, I guess one of the things that I'll always remember is the cigar and the Stetson hat. In fact, he didn't smoke the cigar. He chewed on cigars, and so did Bill Lee at that time. And they would always steal cigars from each other. And but he would chomp on that cigar and finally get it down to just a butt, and he'd throw it away and then get another one and just start chewing on it. And then when he'd come into the Capitol in the morning, he always got there about 8 o'clock. And it was in, of course, January, and the weather was cold. He'd have a top coat on, overcoat. He had this big Stetson cowboy hat on. And he would put that thing and keep it on until he got to his office. He'd take his hat off and put it over in a chair. And I was thinking about that the other day when I was going through a closet of mine at home, and Tom Murphy gave me one of those Stetson hats one time, and he gave Crawford Ware, who was a long-time legislator from up in Hogansville. So Crawford and I had two Tom Murphy hats, and I'm not a hat man, never have been really a hat man, wear a cap playing golf. But, that's something I remember about him. It'll always stay in the back of my mind. Not this, that, or the other, but this was just a little levity. And you could tell him, you'd ask him a question, and he'd put that cigar in there and chomp on it a few minutes before he'd give you an answer. Now, he was thinking the whole time he was chewing. But he loved a good cigar.
Did you ever have breakfast with Marcus?
Used to go over to Marcus's about.
That's Marcus Collins.
Marcus Collins, former member of the House, Chairman of Ways and Means, later Revenue Commissioner. He and Speaker Murphy were very close friends. I'd say they were probably closer than anybody over there. And they had this tradition where somebody would have a breakfast meeting every morning in a hotel room, and you'd come in there and eat some eggs if you wanted to, or some cake, coffee, or orange juice, whatnot. And they had it every morning, Monday through Friday. And you had to be invited to go. And I was always invited. And they had it at the old Marriott Hotel, which I stayed there for 20 years and then moved up to the new Marriott, stayed up there another 20 years. And so I just drive, it's on the way to the Capitol, just drive up and park and go in there and shoot the bull, and you'd see all kind of funny people or good people. And Murphy would always come in, you know, have a cup of coffee and talk to the guys that were in the room before he'd leave to go to the Capitol. But it was kind of a traditional thing. But I would try to get over at least twice a week. But I always went to the Capitol. Well, they have that thing set up where you could go in about 6:30 in the morning. And I always try to be at the Capitol my whole career at 7 o'clock in the morning. I could get more work done, especially when I had Ways and Means and Appropriations. I could get more work done between 7 o'clock and 9 o'clock than I could the rest of the day, because my time was moved doing other things. And so you could go by there, maybe get some feeling about what the topic of the day was going to be or what happened the day before. And Marcus was in charge of the food, and Murphy would come in, of course, and everybody would kiss the ring. And it was just a good way to start your day off, to come in there and see these guys. And I'm thinking about, you know, a lot of the older members that are no longer there would come by. Mm-hmm. And but you had to, you know, you were invited to come. You're not just drop in on your own. And
you served with 7 governors.
Yes, sir. Afraid so.
Let's talk about some of them. What was your impression? We've talked about Lester Maddox, who had no governmental experience, who knew very few members of the legislature, who knew none of the department heads, agency heads. How would you rate his administration?
Lester. You know, Lester, we know him as with his Pickwick restaurant and his axe handles and showmanship, like riding bicycle backwards. But Lester really was a better governor than most people give him credit for. And I say that in that he was painted a racist, but he really wasn't. And he made some outstanding appointments to positions that he had the authority to appoint. Some of his appointments were excellent and not what you would think he would do on courts of appeal, Supreme Court, Board of Regents, things like that. And he liked to go out, he was kind of a showman, you know. And, like I told you earlier, he called me Iceman. And we had one member in our delegation that voted for him, and he was the man that had to go to the governor for Columbus, Georgia. Not Tom Buck couldn't do anything because Tom Buck voted for both Callaway. And so anyway, after, you know, he had some good staff, some real good staff around him, and you know, he was not a bad governor at all. I think each governor I served under had different, of course, you and I have different personalities, but you take, I never did get very close to Lester. I never got close to President Carter, even though he's right down the road here in Plains. Got along super well with Joe Frank Harris, and he was Murphy's boy. Mm-hmm. And Joe Frank would pretty much walk the line on what Murphy wanted to do. And I guess
you served with Busby.
Busby was one of my favorites. At that time, I had known Busby in the House. He'd been majority leader. I'd been involved in leadership. And I just had this great feeling for him. And easy to get to, I mean, not get to, but to get in to see and talk about things. And just a hail fellow well met. And for example, if I wanted to go see the governor, I didn't have to go through the governor's outer office. I could go around the back way and come in and slip in and talk to George whenever I wanted to, and it was the same way with him. And I thought so much of him. He was good to us as a delegation and good to Muskogee County. And then the other one that I have just feel real strong about was Roy Barnes. Mm-hmm. And Roy was an outstanding governor, and quite frankly, he deserved a second term. But Roy's biggest mistake, he was trying to do too many things too quick. If you look back on the race for governor when she lost to Sonny Perdue, our present governor, if you look back on it, he could have withheld taking up the bill that changed the Georgia flag, put it over for his next term. He could have done some other things, delayed things, and it would not be so controversial that would get him in the posture where he got beaten. Mm-hmm. And but had the same kind of relationship with Roy as I did with George Busby. I could get in and see him anytime I wanted to through the back door. Mm-hmm. And that made you feel good. You could do stuff like that. Mm-hmm. And I don't think Sonny has done a real bad job as governor. He's inherited some problems that he can't do anything about, but he's a little bit different than Roy was and the others. I remember when Jimmy Carter got time for him to step aside, I went by his office on the second floor to go outside where they were going to have the inaugural services for governor. And there wasn't a soul in there with Jimmy Carter sitting in his office by himself. And I went over to speak to him, told him I enjoyed serving under him and wished him the very best in the future. But he didn't have anybody with him. He was just lonesome in there waiting to go out and turn the keys to state government over to somebody.
Tom, in 2004, you decided to step down as the senior member of the House with 38 consecutive years in office. Why did you decide to hang it up?
Well, there were several reasons, but one thing, I just did not like the way things were going at the State House. I was still a conservative Democrat. The Republicans are making strides, and eventually you could see that they were going to take over the House and the Senate and the government. And I just didn't want to be involved in all that unpleasantness. And also, I had been there so long, it was kind of like my wife and I have been married about 17 years, and I was never at home, and it was not, it takes a lot of dedication for somebody to stay in public service that long and maintain a good relationship at home with family, wives, children, stepchildren, grandchildren. And I'm fortunate to have married a very fine lady, and she enjoyed my being in the General Assembly up to a point, but I could always see when the session would always start in January, when I'd leave to go to Atlanta on that Sunday before the Monday, she had a smile on her face and said, "Oh, it's good to have a good trip, sweetheart, I'll see you." Well, then about the month would go by, and then that little smile started disappearing on Sundays when I'd leave to go back. And then towards the end, it was she had a lip out. So that was a small consideration, but really I felt like I needed to be at home more than I was. And I was tired of it, and I could see it was going to be very unpleasant with the way things were going. I had been, I still am, a conservative Democrat. The Republican Party, the governor even called and said, "We want you to consider changing parties, and if you'll run as a Republican, we'll guarantee that you stay as chair of appropriations and rules and where you are," which was, something to think about. Well, I got to thinking about that, and then I felt like, well, if I switched parties, I'd have to resign my chairmanship as chairman of appropriations, and that I couldn't, either I'd probably get fired, But Terry Coleman and I were real good friends and have been since he came. I used to be called the baby chairman. I was the youngest chairman, and when Terry got appointed to a chairmanship, he was the new baby chairman. And so I talked it over with family, and I talked over with several good close friends, and I felt like that, you know, you've fought a good fight and you've done a good job, you think, and you've made your contribution to society, and you have paid back the community for all the good things the community has done for you. Just there's numerous reasons. So I finally I talked to my dad, and he said, "Well, son, you know, maybe you ought to think about retiring." And 38 years, and a lot of my buddies were gone, you know, and all, and I still hope to have lived a wonderful life, and still hope I'll have some years ahead of me to enjoy. And like I told you earlier, some of the greatest people I've ever known I met through the Georgia General Assembly and being a member thereof. But it was a tough decision, but I think in the long run I went out on top. And but now, I was in the state capitol yesterday, and I bet you half a dozen legislators came up and said, "We sure wish you were back here running the Appropriations Committee. We think we can get things resolved." And I said, "Well, I miss y'all, but I don't miss being involved." I don't have any regrets. And looking back, we've got a good delegation from Muskogee County, and I'm fortunate to have a wonderful relationship with all of them, and we have always maintained longevity. I mean, you know, Calvin Smyrie is from Muskogee, and he's been in the House probably about 34 years. And we've got Carolyn Hughley, she's a leader in the Democratic caucus. She's been there, we got 10, 15 years. We've always had people that stay there. And, you know, the longer you stay, the longer you either going to move up the ladder or you ain't going to get reelected. And so anyway, I don't have any regrets.
As you look back over your career, is there anything you might have done differently?
Gosh, Bob, I would imagine there are a dozen things I'd done differently, but without having given it any thought, I can't think of anything off the top of my head that would allow me to comment on some things. I was very lucky to be where I was, and I think I was somewhat effective when I was in positions to be effective in. But I don't miss all the fussing and fighting. I told Terry Coleman this one time. I said, you know, the Republican Party would have a caucus about once a week. The Democratic Party would have a caucus about once a week. We'd go across the street to not underground, but over behind the Presbyterian Church. I can't remember what we used to call that place, but anyway, we'd have these meetings over there. And I went to Terry Coleman and I said, "Boss, I love you like a brother, but I said, I ain't going to any more of these Democratic caucus meetings unless you make me go." And he said, "Why?" I said, "All you do is sit up there and listen to people argue with each other." I said, "You know, I don't have time for that." And he said, "Well, if I need you, I'll call you." I said, "You do that and I'll come running." And so Terry could see what was coming. Larry Walker could see what was coming. Jimmy Skipper, a lot of those have been there for a long time. You could see there's going to be a change, and unfortunately, the change hadn't really. Those that now have the power, I don't think know how to use it. It takes a little time, of course. And for example, this situation that developed recently would have a new speaker in the middle of a term. That's not good. I think David Rawson, very qualified, is going to do a good job as speaker, but it just seems to me that they hadn't been able to put their act together like they should.
What has life been like since you left the General Assembly?
Well, life's been good. You know, we're here in this meeting today, and it's my office, but it used to be where I lived when I was born. And my father left us about 2 years ago. He and I were very close. My mother left us about 10 years ago, 12 years ago. And I had two brothers younger than I that have passed and gone to glory. But I've got some stepsons and some step-grandsons that live here, 3 boys, and have a close relationship with them. And I stay busy volunteering on several boards like the Spring Opera House, which we named the State Theater of Georgia, and River Center for Arts. I'm on that board. St. Francis Hospital, I'm on that board. Several other, Naval Museum down on the river. So I have those kind of meetings, and I will soon be the next chair of the Board of Trustees at St. Francis Hospital, which will be very demanding. It's already demanding as vice chair, but I volunteered to do that, and that keeps me busy. But most of all, when the weather's right, is my golf group gets together, usually on Tuesdays, Wednesdays, and Fridays. And I've got a condominium that fortunately I have had for 18, 19 years at St. Simon's Island at the King and Prince. So Susan and I get to go down there a lot, and we'll go down and stay 5 or 6 days and come home and go back down or whatnot, and have friends come down and spend the weekend with us. So I stay pretty busy. I still get up early every morning, and I'm downtown at the coffee shop about 7 and sit there and read the paper. And we don't get the Atlanta paper here anymore. I miss that. But read the paper, and we got a diverse group. We got my pastor comes, and we got some law enforcement people come. The sheriff comes, several other guys, and you sit there and shoot the bull and talk about what happened the day before, what's going to happen tomorrow, and read the paper again, you know, and it take about an hour to get started. Then I go to my daddy's office. Then I come here after I've gone to the post office downtown. So I take care of my business between, say, 8 o'clock and 11 o'clock. And go to church every Sunday, Sunday school every Sunday.
Finally,
I've got a full life.
Finally, this question. How would you like to be remembered?
Well, I would like to be remembered as somebody who made a contribution to the betterment of humanity as far as Georgia is concerned. I would like to be remembered as somebody that was dedicated and a hard worker in a position such as being an elected official. And I would like to be remembered as somebody that had a very good work ethic. Also enjoy a reputation of being fair and square and honest. Several things I would like to be remembered, and I also like to be remembered as somebody that the people had my constituency had a lot of confidence in me and my ability, and given me the privilege to have served for 38 years. So I guess I pretty much covered all that.
Well, you certainly have earned that reputation.
Well, you're kind. You're kind.
I want to thank you, Tom Buck, on behalf of Young Harris College and the Richard B. Russell Library at the University of Georgia.
Well, it's been a real pleasure for me to see you, Bob. I hadn't seen you in several years, but we've known each other for a long time. And I'm honored that you would ask me to be a part of this program. And I look forward to seeing it.